Hi, this is Janet from Paper and Spark. This is part 3 of our video series of tutorials on how to use your inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet. If you don't have your inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet, it's available for sale at paperandspark.com. We're going to move on from the cost of goods made formula tab to our yellow pricing formula tab. And I know I skipped the blue overhead detail tab, but we'll go back to that one soon. I want to talk about pricing first. The most important thing that you need to know about this tab is the formula behind how it calculates your handmade items price. So that being said, let's discuss the different pieces of the pricing formula used in this spreadsheet. First, we have this green column here, your direct materials or your cost of goods made, which is handily flowing directly from the green tab that we just came from. So this number in this column here, it's going to automatically be linking here. So you can see for our wire wrapped pearl ring, we had $1.10 worth of direct materials, and that ties back to my $1.10 here. So that one's pretty straightforward. Next, we have our labor rate. These two columns represent paying yourself for the time it took to create the finished product. We do that on this spreadsheet in a few steps. First, you need to come up here and enter how much you want to pay yourself an hour. Now, this number is linked everywhere on this column. So if you change it, anytime you change it, it's going to change all your prices. So you want to set it once and leave it like that for the rest of your spreadsheet's life. If you're ever going to change it, you're going to cause yourself heartache, so you need to copy your spreadsheet and change it in a new updated version. So decide what you want to pay yourself an hour. That can be, $10, $20, $100, whatever you feel comfortable with. Enter that here, and it'll automatically calculate based on that number that you enter. So anytime you have a finished product that you create, you'll need to go to this column right here, this white column that says time to make, and you'll need to enter in 1 hour units how long it took you to make that product. So when I say 1 hour units, I mean if it took you 20 minutes out of an hour, 20 divided by 60 is 0.333333, and so on. So you'd enter 0.3. If it took you, half of an hour, you'd enter that as 0.5. You don't want to enter it in minute units. You want it to be per hour. Overall, this is the formula that the pricing tab uses. Supplies plus labor times 2 plus your overhead rate gets you your wholesale price, and then your wholesale price times 2 gets you your retail price. Now, those times 2 numbers that I'm saying are represented here by your wholesale markup and then by your retail markup. So when you make a finished good, you'll want to enter the time it took you to make that item in 1 hour units. So this column B right here, this yellow labor rate column, is simply going to be the time it took you to make it times or multiplied by your hourly rate. So 0.3 times 15 means that I should pay myself $4.50 in labor for making my wire wrapped pearl ring. And this is just one other input item that needs to go into my pricing formula. Okay, next you have the blue column C here, your overhead rate. Now, this data is going to come from your overhead detail tab, and now is a great time for us to talk about this overhead detail tab. So I'm going to switch to my overhead detail tab. This is back on my spreadsheet that doesn't have anything input into it already. Before I talk about what this tab does, we need to discuss what overhead is. If you recall, on our light green tabs over here, we entered our materials, our supplies that went directly into our finished goods. Things like beads, fabric, elastic, wire, chain, paper. Um, it all depends on what you make, obviously. But these tabs were for direct materials. When I say direct materials, I mean raw supplies that you can easily and directly and specifically trace to your finished product. So I can count exactly how many beads went into this ring. I can count exactly how many yards of fabric went into this dress. Direct materials can be traced directly to a finished product. Now, life is not that easy. Crafting is not that straightforward. You are going to have things called indirect materials, and those are items that you need on hand to create your finished good for sale, but you can't directly trace them. Those fall into two categories. The first one is going to be indirect supplies, and those are supplies that go into your good, but you can't really count exactly how much went in. And that would be like glue. I used this bottle of glue to make this handmade card, but I have no idea exactly how much glue came out of the bottle to go into this card. That would be really painful to measure, and I'm not going to do that. The second type of indirect material are your tools. Your tools don't literally go into your finished product, but you're required to use that tool in order to create it. That's something like your sewing machine, your pliers, your scissors. You can't create that finished good without your tools, but you can't trace your tool to your product on a specific basis. So these are two types of materials that need to be included when you're pricing your finished good, but we need to figure out a way to do that because they're not simple and straightforward like your direct supplies and your direct materials, but they still need to be included. Otherwise, you're not pricing your good high enough to cover the cost of those indirect materials. I hope that makes sense to you. So the way that we do that is we come up with something called an overhead rate. And an overhead rate is going to go into your pricing formula. Basically, what an overhead rate is in a big zoomed out view is summing up all the expenses for those indirect materials and those indirect tools and your business expenses, your general business expenses. We sum all of them up, and then we divide a little portion of that big sum into the price of every product that you make. Every product that you make is going to get a little piece of that expense included in its price, and that little piece is called an overhead rate. So there's lots of different ways and methods to calculate your overhead rate. This spreadsheet just gives you one, and it's a very simple, straightforward method, but you're free to toy with the formula that I use here and make it work better for you if you think there's a better way. But this is how we're going to get you started. The important thing is just to make sure that you calculate an overhead rate and you include an overhead rate in your formula so that you can cover all of your business's expenses and not just the simple, straightforward, direct materials expense. So how are we going to do the overhead rate? First, we're going to start by entering the costs of all our indirect materials that we're using. So I'm going to go with the example, continue the example that I create jewelry, and I'm going to enter the cost of some of the jewelry making tools that I use. I'm just going to enter a few random things here so you can get the idea. Alright, so those are my indirect materials, my tools, and my indirect supplies that I use for my business. The second category of costs that I need for my overhead rate is a bit more vague, but it's still important that you take it into consideration. Your business has some general expenses that are not directly related to your products. These are going to be things like your web hosting for your website or your blog, or they might be the cost of printing your business cards that go into your packaging, or craft show fees when you apply to sell at a craft show, or a graphic designer that does your branding and your logo design. Your business has all these expenses, and I think that your overhead rate should take these into account because you pay these expenses. If you don't account for them in the price of your goods, then you cannot cover them. Your profit multiplier in your pricing formula should be to cover profit, not to cover the expenses that you did not already include in your pricing formula. So it's my belief that you should enter them here and let them be represented in your overhead rate that goes into your price formula. So I'm going to enter a few of my business expenses in this column. Hopefully, theoretically, all of my business expenses in this column. And we're going to calculate our overhead rate on an annual basis. So I'm going to enter, hypothetically, 1 year's worth of business expenses here. So I'm going to enter a few things like what I previously mentioned, those examples. Nothing too crazy. This tab here is going to automatically calculate a number for me, and it's going to calculate it based on this one blue cell here, your estimated products created this year. You need to input a number here. The spreadsheet comes with 350 there as a default, but you need to enter your own number there. What the heck is that number? That is, you've got all these costs here. You're summing all of these costs. These are your every cost your business has other than your direct material costs, because we've got those covered here in green. So this tab is going to sum all these non-direct material costs, and then it needs to divide it by something to get a rate per product for our pricing formula. And what I suggest you divide it by is the estimated products you create in a year. You're going to estimate how many items across all your product categories. It doesn't have to be one specific type of product, just all products you think you're going to make this year, and you enter it here. Because now that gets us this overhead rate, this $2.49. That's going to go into the price of every product you make. That's why I think estimated products created per year is a good denominator to use for your overhead rate. You could also go with estimated products sold. That'll give you a little more, a higher number, theoretically, a higher number, and a more conservative overhead rate. But I like using estimated products created because my thought process is that eventually, hopefully, all the products you create will eventually sell. So you want it to be in every product's price formula.